Well, good morning and welcome to SouthPoint, where we're one church in multiple locations. I want to say good morning to our Leonardtown campus. I want to say good morning to our Lusby campus. I want to say good morning to those of you who are watching on YouTube channel. We're so glad that you're with us this morning. Is anyone fired up to be here this Sunday morning? Well, my name is Matt. I'm part of the team here. We're on our last week of our series called Life is a Tough Mudder. Now, here's the good thing. If you've missed any of these weeks, you can go onto our website, you can go to our YouTube channel, and all the past weeks have been there. So if you've missed it, you can go back there and catch up or watch any of the messages that you may have missed. Now, over the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've repeated the same truth every week because this truth applies to all of us. It doesn't matter whether you're agnostic or you're an atheist. It doesn't matter whether you're a Christian all your life or a brand new follower of Jesus, or maybe you have some other faith. The reality is this truth that we've reminded ourselves of every week applies to all of us, no matter where you are on the spectrum. And here's the truth, and it has 2 parts. This is part 1. Everyone wants a good life. I've said that every week. Listen, no one's ever come to me and go, listen, Pastor Matt, my life's too good. Can you make it more miserable, please? Like, no one's ever done it. We all want a good life, and every single one of us will face obstacles. Listen, that applies to each and every one of us. Doesn't matter who you are, what's happened, or where you are in life, that all of us want a good life, and all of us will face obstacles. And as we come to a close, I'm pretty pumped because today I get to kind of share some good news. I get to kind of give some solutions. So we're going to kind of jump straight into our opening truth this morning so that we can dive right into the solution. And here's the opening truth. Matter of fact, if you're following in your insert, it says, sometimes intention and effort aren't enough to get the results we want. Sometimes our want to and our try to aren't enough. Aren't you glad you came to church today? Right? Like, can we just be honest? Sometimes our want to, our try to, our attention and our effort aren't enough to get us the results that we want. And listen, I discovered this the hard way. True story. It's from way back in the day. Matter of fact, it goes all the way back to my days when I was in high school. Now, you have to understand something. I didn't get to experience high school like most people did. You see, I was incarcerated, went into the juvenile justice system at 12 and a half, so I never experienced middle school. I went straight from elementary into the juvie system. Right? And then I didn't get out till I was almost 16 and a half. Matter of fact, when I got out, I was going into the last half of my junior year. It was January. And so I went to this public school in this brand new area I'd never lived in before. And when I got to this school and they said, hey, where are you at? And they asked me what kind of classes, and they got my transcripts, and they said, what have you taken? And I had literally taken 1 week of geometry. But I needed to pass math so that I didn't have to go to summer school, and so I didn't have to go to school longer. And so they said, well, what did you just finish up this past semester? And I said, geometry, even though I was only 1 week into geometry. And it was halfway through the school year. And they said, great, we'll put you into the geometry class. And listen, I was a knucklehead growing up. Listen, I was a knucklehead. I didn't make a lot of smart choices, but one thing I knew is you should graduate high school for any of students out there. You just finish it. You're partway through. I just knew that if I wanted life to work, I wanted to finish it. I didn't want to go to summer schools. I wanted my summer free. I wanted to pass this class. So I went to class every day. I did my homework. I listened to the teacher. But as the year was coming to a close, guess what kind of grade I had? It wasn't a B or a C. It wasn't even a D. Keep on going down the scale. It was an F. And so my teacher met with me and she said, Matt, I don't get this. Like, you raise your hand, you ask questions, you try to do the homework I have to give, you fail it almost every time. She goes, what's going on? And I said, well, I don't understand. I didn't learn some of the concepts early. And so geometry is all about using concepts you learn, and they kind of build upon each other. And if you don't have the first ones, it doesn't matter how much want to or try to you have, you're not going to do it. And so I was failing this class, and I was not going to summer school. No, wasn't going to summer school. And so I asked the teacher, is there anything I can do? She goes, well, I tell you what, you're trying, you're doing the homework, you're taking the test. How about this? I'll let you earn extra credit for every geometric shape that you can draw, and you name them, you put the angles. So you know what I did every Saturday from the day that I met with my teacher? On Saturdays, I would spend hours drawing shapes. I had hundreds and hundreds. It's the only way I went from an F to a D. I also think that school didn't want me there because I had been a troublemaker in my first 6 months anyway. I think they just wanted to graduate me and get me out of the school. And here's what I discovered in my geometry class. I didn't pass because I tried to or I wanted to. I passed because of the mercy of a teacher. And I learned in that lesson, it wasn't how hard I tried, how hard I wanted it. Sometimes want to and try to don't get the results that we want. And it got me thinking, am I the only person that's have you ever wanted to and tried to, but you didn't get the results you wanted? I mean, come on, think about it. Maybe it was you were in high school, and maybe your friend, he or she wanted you to join the team, and they said, so come to tryouts. And so you went to tryouts, and you wanted to and you tried to, but you didn't make the team because you hadn't been practicing all summer. You weren't in condition, and so you just didn't make the team even though you wanted to and you tried to. Maybe for you it wasn't high school. Maybe for you it was college. Maybe it was this program that you wanted to go into. You discovered your college had, and they had this placement exam. And so you went to bed the night before, and then you got up and you drank this stuff called coffee. Probably now it's Monster, back in Monsters, right? You drank Monsters like, I'm going to pass this test. And you went and you wanted to and you tried to, but you didn't pass the test. And I'm not trying to be mean, but you didn't take any of the classes to learn this stuff so that you could go into this special program. Maybe for you it was in your career. You saw this job that you wanted. You've never really done it, but you thought this would be awesome. And so listen, you woke up that morning and you put on your best clothes and you brushed your tooth and you used a mint and you gave a firm handshake and you gave them eye contact, you know. You did all the things you were supposed to do in the interview, and you wanted to and you tried to, but the problem is you're zero experience in that role. They said, we like you, but you didn't get the job, even though you wanted to and you tried to. Maybe for you it was financial. Maybe you found a dream home 3 sizes too big for you. You know, you said, oh, I like this, and so we want it, and we're going to try to, and so you applied for a loan. And they said you could qualify for a house, just not that one yet. You wanted to, and you tried to. Now, the next two are going to be a little tough. They're going to hit a little bit below the belt, so no one bump the person next to you. Nobody give an eyeball raise. But like, listen, if you're here, have you ever wanted to and tried to be a friend with your children? I discovered this is an oxymoron. Parent and friend often don't go together. Like, listen, when they're little, they love you and they want to be a friend. But if you're here and you're a parent, you'll get this. You want to be their friend. You try to be their friend. But when they become teenagers, their brains, something goes wrong with them. And sometimes as a parent, you have to say no, and you have to be their parent and not their friend, and they don't like you. And sometimes we don't like you back either, teens. And it's not because you don't want to or you don't try to. It's just sometimes that parent relationship means you can't be a friend for all the want to and all the try to in the world. What about in our marriage? We want a good marriage. We want to rekindle that spark. We want our spouse to know that we love them. The problem is we try to love them in our love languages. I really encourage this is free. This is for a message for a different day. But we all feel different ways. And for some of us, we feel loved when we get gifts or affections. So if your love language is gifts and affections, you'll probably give gifts and gives affections. But the problem is, I guarantee you, your spouse's love language is probably different than yours. Theirs might be time spent with and acts of service. So you buy them all these gifts, give them all this affection, and they spend time with you, and they do acts of service, and you guys don't feel loved. You wanted to, and you tried to. And this leads us to a problem. For all the want to and all the try to in the world, sometimes we don't get the results we want. And here's the hard part. Sometimes, for all of our want to, for all of our try to, we don't get the results we need. And you've experienced this, and I've experienced this. Trying harder with something that doesn't work still doesn't work. Let me say it again. Trying harder with something that doesn't work, it still doesn't work. When you and I give effort and energy to something that is unproductive, we end up with results that we didn't want. It's useless. And you know what it does? It causes us to be frustrated. It causes pain and agony, things that nobody in this room wants, regardless of where you fall on that faith spectrum. And so as we close out this series, Life is a Tough Mudder, one of the most important questions we need to ask is, how do we not try harder with something that doesn't work? Because if we were honest, sometimes our intention and effort aren't enough to get the results that we want. So how do we do that? Now, in the midst of this kind of hard truth, this thing that we've all experienced, there is some good news. Smile and look at your neighbor. Yeah. You're not alone. We've all, listen, everyone that's walked on the planet Earth has experienced this. And the news gets better. God knew that human beings, you and I, we would struggle with this. Matter of fact, Jesus himself addresses this very issue. Listen, sometimes your intention and effort isn't to get the results you want. Matter of fact, before we dive into the scripture, Jesus is speaking to a group of people. Matter of fact, the group of people is so large, he has to get out on this boat and he has to use the water and so that he doesn't get crushed and people can hear. And Jesus teaches in parables and kind of stories that people, sometimes could understand, sometimes they couldn't. And he tells this story about a farmer, and he says the farmer goes out and throws some seed. Now, in those days, that was pretty important because people back in those days, the way they survived, they didn't go down to 7-Eleven. They grew their own food, and many times the way that they made an income was they grew more food than they needed, and they sold it or bartered or traded, and that's how people lived. And so people would go out and throw seed, and he says a farmer went out and sowed seed, and some of it fell on the path, and a bird came and ate it. Some of the seed, it fell on shallow or rocky ground, and it grew up really quickly. But when the sun came out, it had no roots, and it dried and withered up. And he said, others fell in the weeds and the thorny soil. And as they grew up, the thorns and the weeds choked the life, and it was unproductive. And he said, some others fell in good soil, and it created a crop some 30, some 60, some 100 times fold. Now, Jesus shared that with the crowd. But in private, the disciples were like, Jesus, that's a pretty interesting parable. And that's where we pick it up. We pick it up in Mark, an eyewitness account of the gospel, and they asked Jesus, what does this parable mean? And then Jesus said unto them, don't you understand this parable? How then will you understand any parable? We've been saying every week, Jesus, the whole point is this, if you don't get this truth, this one truth from the seed and the soil, how will you understand any part of life? He says, if you don't get this, life won't work. You need to understand this parable. And then he goes on to explain. He says, the farmer sows the word. And what Jesus is saying, listen, there's some wisdom, there's instruction on how life is to work. And God gives that to us through people, through our minds, through things, through the Bible. And then he says, some people are like the seed along the path where the word is sown, and as soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes the word away that was sown in them. Others are like seed sown on the rocky places. They hear the word at once and receive with joy, but since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. They have no root. Still others are like seed sown among the thorns. They hear the word, but the worries of this light, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires for other things come in and choke out the word, making it unfruitful. Others are like seed sown on the good soil. They hear the word, they accept it, and they produce a crop some 30, some 60, some 100 times what was sown. I mean, each week we've said the same thing. Listen, all of us are farmers in life. All of us do the things we do to get the results we want. And Jesus is saying, listen, we go out and do these things hoping for certain results, but if we were really honest, many times the things we don't lead to the results that we want. He says, it's not the seed, it's not the good that you and I want, it's the how we get to the good that we want that he says the problem. It's never the seed, it's always the... That was a trick question. Let's try that one more time. It's never the seed, it's always the soil. And Jesus says, listen, these are 3 common obstacles that everyone's going to face. Now I'm going to put up a slide with a screen because week 2 is going to be a little circle and it's going to have the different parts of our life in it. And we're going to put it up here in there. That one right there. Remember we said in week 2 that God made us multifaceted. We're relational, emotional, intellectual, and physical, and financial. We have all these areas of our lives. And Jesus says, if you don't understand this principle of the soul, that sometimes you can have these different things and all these differences in your life, how will you be able to win in any of those lives? And then last week we discovered what those 3 obstacles are. We're going to put it up here. The 3 obstacles that everyone faces that can be hard to see is that we get hardened. Remember last week we talked about when you and I experience pain or trauma, I talked about the death of my mom and how when we experience pain or trauma, we're hardened, and so it bends or warps how we think, see, and feel. Number 2 is shallow. Listen, to experience the results we want often calls for discipline and delayed gratification, but we don't like the pain of discipline or delayed gratification. So what we do is we try to avoid it, except we experience the pain of disappointment. See, I've discovered you'll experience pain, either the pain of discipline and delayed gratification or disappointment. The choice is ours. But sometimes we're shallow through pain avoidance. Or we can become unproductive due to distracted by desires and duty. There's a hobby, there's a habit, there's a hang-up. We get so involved in the daily grind, we forget that we're not human doings, that we're human beings. That while desires and duties are given to God, we're made with a destiny. And those are the three obstacles that we could face in any one of those areas: our vocation, our spirituality, our physical, our emotions, our relation, our finances. We can experience these in any one of those areas. Now, I couldn't wait to get to this Sunday because I get to give us the solution for each one of those kinds of soils. Now, I need to be honest. I will be as brief as I can, but each one of these solutions for the hardened soil, the shallow soil, and the unproductive soil could actually be a whole message in themselves, but I don't have a time to give you 3 one-hour messages today. You should smile. You should be pretty fired up about that right now. Like, good. I hope he's not going to go that long. Okay, so we're going to cover, and these are just 3 brief solutions. And so I really want to start with them. We're going to go to the first one, and you can follow along. And here it says, the hardened path is softened by love and grace. The hardened path is softened by love and grace. Every single one of us will experience some kind of pain or trauma or hurt in our life. It's unavoidable. We live in a broken world with imperfect people. Now, I don't know what area of your life you may experience that. It may be in your relationships. It may be spiritually. It may be physically. But at some point, we're all going to experience pain or hurt and trauma. And here's what's going to happen, because it's happened to me. We're going to be mad at God. We might come to church and smile. We might not post it on Facebook. But in our hearts, we're mad at God. We're hurt. And we ask a question that I bet each and every one of us has asked. Why, God? Where were you, God? I mean, God, how could you let my parents get divorced? God, how could you let grandma or grandpa pass away? God, how could you let that person do that bad thing to me? God, how could you let me make that stupid choice that has lifelong consequences that I'll never, ever be able to get rid of? God, how could you let me get injured? God, how could you let me get sick? God, how could you let my dream die? God, where are you? And so whatever area of life we experience that pain or hurt and we cry out, why? It bends or warps the way we think, but the only way for that thinking to be changed, to be softened, is through love and grace. You see, here's what I've discovered. A lot of times God doesn't answer the why question. God didn't answer why my mom committed suicide. God didn't answer why I got sent to a counselor who was a child molester. God didn't answer the question why my dad took me to the police station and said, hope you got what you want. Like, I didn't get an answer to that. And most of the time, if we're really honest, whatever kind of pain you've experienced, you will probably not get an answer of why. But here's what I've discovered. God does answer a different question. And you should smile, because God answers a question that's more important than why. God answers a how much does he love you question. How much does God love you? He sent his one and only son. And his one and only son suffered all the horrible things that we've suffered. He was abandoned. He was betrayed. He was denied. He was unjustly condemned to death. He was tortured through crucifixion. He was mocked. He was spit upon. He bled to death on a cross. He bore the weight of sin and was separated for the only time in eternity from his heavenly Father. He was abandoned alone. So God doesn't answer the why those bad things happen to us. But God does answer the how much he loves us question. I love what Ephesians 2:4-7 says. We're going to put it up here on the screen. It's on the back of your insert. It says this, Ephesians 2:4-7 says, but because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in his mercy, made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in our transgressions. Life happens to us and we get hurt and we rage at God, and then we go make stupid decisions that don't hurt him. They hurt us and they hurt others. Or we medicate our pain, or we do things that damage ourselves and damage those we love. And whatever that thing is that we did, that worst thing, God still loved us. It is by grace you've been saved. We ought to be the most excited people on the planet on Sunday morning. God doesn't love us or accept us because we were good enough. We earned it. We were born into it. He loves us because he sent his son to do what we couldn't do, to pay a price we couldn't pay. I'll never forget. I was a hard-hearted person. Do you know what it's like to lose both your parents before you're 13? One physically, the other emotionally and relationally. You know what it's like to be locked up? Have a heart full of hate and anger, mostly at yourself. Then I ran into a person I never expected. His name was Marvin Jones. He was an older African-American gentleman. If you've been around SouthPoint, you know how much I love Marvin. Marvin worked at the detention center where I was being held for the first 6 months from 12 and a half to almost 13. And Marvin was not like all the other detention people. There was something different about him. He didn't treat me like I was busted and broken. Now, don't get me wrong. He wasn't weak or soft. But for the first time, I experienced something very different. He would pull me aside, and when I'd get in trouble, he'd say, "What's going on, Matt?" He goes, "Don't you know that your life is worth something? Don't throw it away. Don't you know that and he tried, and he did his best. I know there was a thin line he was trying to cover between his job and sharing that there's a God who loved me and a God who made me and a God who wanted to be my friend. See, here's what I've discovered. The only thing that will soften a hard heart where we experience pain and trauma is the love and grace found not in a religion, not in a pastor, not in a church, not in a country, not in politics, but a love and grace found in a person named Jesus. I'll never forget being in detention center, and I was reading a Bible. I didn't really grow up in church. And I'll never forget reading about the thief on the cross. When they crucified Jesus, there were two thieves. And there was one thief who was kind of mocking Jesus, and the other thief said, "Listen, we're here because we deserve it. This man is innocent." And he looks at Jesus and says, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And this is what I love about the gospel. It's so simple. The gospel means we see ourselves correctly and we see Jesus correctly. The thief realized he was there because he deserved it. He was wrong. Jesus was innocent and dying in his place, and that Jesus was the King of Kings, and he said, "Remember me." And Jesus said, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." And I realized in that moment that thief did nothing. He didn't go to church. He didn't tithe. He didn't serve. He was loved simply because he existed. I'm sorry, and your pain is very legitimate. But when we let our pain continue to hurt us the rest of our life, we don't experience life the way God intended. We'll never get the results we want. The only way for that hardened area of our life to experience healing is to allow the love and grace of God in our life. Now, here's the funny thing. Most times, to experience God's love and grace, it comes through the most amazing way you would never think of. Matter of fact, I think it's pretty broken, but it works. You know what God does to tell people that he loves them? He uses people. Broken people. Deeply flawed people. If you're here and you have a hurt, and you're wondering, does God love you? Maybe you're here because a coworker or a friend or a gym friend or a family member or a neighbor invited you. If you're here and you have a hurt and you're hardened and about finances, maybe get in a small group about Financial Peace University. If you're here and you're struggling with addiction because you're masking your pain, get connected to our Celebrate Recovery. Get involved with some people. If you're here and you have some hurt and pain in your relationship or spiritual, we have this thing called Stephen's Ministry. They're not counselors, but they're Christians who've been trained to walk alongside of you. Listen, you don't have to do life alone. That's the great news about the gospel. That God uses people like us to love other people. But we need to be willing to be around other people. So, if you have an area of your life that is hurt, is full of pain, and you are hardened, instead of trying harder, wanting to and trying to, how about we allow God's love and grace to do what we can't do? Which leads me to the shallow ground. which is, we're going to put it up here on the screen. So he said, the shallow ground is deepened through training. Now, everyone is going to like the first part. Love and grace. Oh, that feels so good. I don't do anything. I just receive God's grace. People love me. That's awesome. My heart becomes changed because God loves me and gives me grace. But this one, no one's going to like, because the shallow ground is deepened through training. Everyone smile. Training. People love that word. No one likes that word. We all hate that word. And listen, by the way, this isn't my idea. This comes straight from Scripture. We're going to go to Thessalonians. We're going to put it up here on the screen. Physical training is what? What's the word there? Physical training is good. We should be excited about that. It helps us be. Listen, come on. I like bacon and I like chocolate. I discovered the more I exercise, the more I get to eat it. Training is good, right? But training for godliness. Training for godliness is much better, promising, what's the word? Benefits. Training for godliness in this life, promising benefits in this life and the life to come. Listen, we all have shallow ground. Listen, no one goes, listen, I'd love to do it the hard way. I want to suffer. No one says that. I don't say that. I want it the easiest way. I want it comfortable and convenient. But usually good results don't come through comfort and convenience. They come through discipline and delayed gratification. I'll never forget what one person said to me. This phrase was so impactful. I remember exactly where I was when they said it. They said, listen, you can do by training what you can't do by trying. Y'all look confused. Let me say that one more time. You can do by training what you can't do by trying. Let me give you an example. I was trying to think of an example. Listen, I like to lift weights, and I know you're probably looking at me and go, you should get your money back, or try something different. But listen, I have this goal. I'm a couple years away from 50, and I have this goal. I want to lift a certain amount of weight on my squat, my bench, and my deadlift. It's powerlifting, and I know you look at me and go, man, you're sad, brother. And I go, that's okay. God made me the way it is. I'm okay with that, right? So I had this goal of lifting this certain amount of weight on my squat, but I couldn't even do it once. And that was pretty embarrassing. Like, I go to the gym and I tried and I couldn't even do it once, and it just was on me, and then I fell and I was sitting in the squat rack and I went, help, somebody come get me. Like, it's embarrassing, right? So here's what I did. I decided, listen, you know what? I'm going to do by training what I can't do by trying. So I hired a coach, and this coach gave me a program. And the program said, listen, if you go in and you train this number of times a day and you do these things and you begin to progress, you'll be able to do through training what you couldn't do through trying. And here's the great news. 8 months later, I rep out what I couldn't even do once. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. I mean, think about it. If I asked you to run a marathon today, about 2 of you could probably do it. But the rest of us that couldn't do it, if we gave 6 months, we could do it if we what? What we could do if we what? If we trained. Listen, I want you to know, listen, come on. This is where TV preachers and booksellers and all those people, man, they want to tell you that there's some secret, that if you do the secret, it's a magical bean and it solves all your problem. There is no magical bean. Habits beat willpower every time. Build good habits and you'll get good results. That's why it says train yourself to be godly. It didn't say it would come natural. Me being a knucklehead comes natural. I have to train myself not be a moron. But that didn't happen overnight. I had to build habits. So let me ask you a question. In that circle, when it comes to your finances, when it comes to being physical, when it comes to your relationships, when it comes to your spirituality, I want to ask, what kind of habits do you have? And as you leave here, I don't want you to go, I'm going to try 20 new habits, because you'll fail if you try 20 new habits. But you can do 1 new habit. And here would be my number 1 recommended habit if you would walk away from here. Read the Bible daily. Even if you're not a follower of Jesus, there's a lot of good advice and good wisdom in the Bible. And if you're a follower of Jesus, it reminds you how much God loves you, and it reminds us and it directs us in the right direction. Maybe for you, you already have the habit of reading your Bible. Maybe your habit could be, stop shopping so much. Maybe your habit could be, listen, I'm going to exercise 3 times a week. Even if that's just, listen, I'm going to walk for 20 minutes. Maybe your habit is just, I'm going to eat better. Maybe your habit is, I'm going to watch less TV and I'm going to read. Maybe your habit is, I'm going to do my homework before tests. I don't know what your habit is. But if you look at your life and you said, yep, I have some shallow ground where I am not willing to practice discipline or delayed gratification, that's not going to change overnight. We have to create a habit. What habit do you want to create to experience the results that you want? Listen, none of us wants to give energy and effort to something only to see it fail. Like I said, you and I are going to experience pain. We'll experience the pain of discipline, or we'll experience the pain of disappointment. And you know what? Here's the sad thing. Christians will go, listen, but I came to church and I prayed and I waved my hand at God. Well, that's great. But God made the universe to work on a principle, which is for every action, there's an equal and opposite. Jesus calls it the law of sowing and reaping. You get what you put in. That's the way God made it. Just because you pray, just because you show up to church, God's not going to somehow circumvent the thing that He created. So we have to build in habits into our life. So I want to ask, what habits are you building into your life that are going to lead to the results you want? Do you have the habit of cutting your spouse off? Do you have the habit of staying late at work? Do you have the habit of not engaging your kids? Do you have the habit of always talking about yourself and your like what habit do you need to change to experience the life that you want? Which leads me to the last one. How do we solve the unproductive soil? The thorny soil is cleared when you join a mission that is bigger than ourselves. See, Jesus says, here's what happens. The seed gets sown in the soil and it starts to grow and everything is looking really good and it grows up, but weeds and thorns, they come around and it looks just like the weeds, but it never actually produces anything. And you know what? Here's a sad thing, and I know I've been guilty of this. Maybe you've been guilty of this. But sometimes we just think life is all about us. Then we think, listen, all of the blessings God gave me are so that I can be blessed. It's all about having better. Jesus came not to be served, but to serve and give His life as a ransom. If you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, you weren't made just to consume. You were made to make this world a better place. It wasn't about having better. It was about making better. And the reality is, even if you're not a follower of Jesus, you know this to be true. Your life is not full until you add to the world, because somewhere in the human way that we're made, we don't experience life until we've given back. Here's the problem. We think life is a vacation with a few little bits of mission in it. See, no one's going to like this. But the reality is, if you're here and you're a Christ follower, you are on a mission with some vacations in it. But we're on mission. And here's what I discovered. When you realize that you have a purpose, it changes what you expect in life. Let me say this again. When you realize your purpose, it will change your expectations. Let me give you an example of this. Does anyone remember Hurricane Katrina? Anybody remember Hurricane Katrina? Yeah. Matter of fact, SouthPoint was a fairly new church when that happened. Matter of fact, we took an offering. We sent a group of people down there to do what is called a mission trip. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know much about mission trips, but I know if I go on a mission trip, my job is not to vacation. My job is to work and to help people. Now, having been young and incarcerated, I slept on bad cots, on concrete. I've eaten jail food, and I've done manual labor. I worked fencing. So I just figured this would be like going home for me, And so when we went down to New Orleans with a group of people, there were some people on our team who were like, man, this food isn't good. And I go, we're not here for good food. They're like, man, we're sleeping in these cots in these rehab dorms, and we had to sleep with other people, and the bathrooms, they're not really clean. I'm like, man, this is fine. I can sleep good. It's really hot and sweaty down here in New Orleans. Yeah, we're here to work. And here's what I discovered. When I realized I was going on a mission, my expectations weren't to have fun. My expectations were to go help other people. And in doing that, I realized there was going to be some effort and some sweat. And there's going to be some sacrifices. And I wonder, if we realized that we were a part of a mission, life wouldn't be so much about hooray for me. It'd be like, how do I help the busted and broken world? And can we all admit right now, the world is busted and broken? And people are like, where's God? Well, God had a plan, and you know what His plan is? Us. But if we're all focused on ourselves, I want to have a new car, and there's nothing wrong with a new car. If you have a new car, I'm not against you, right? But if we're always worried about having a car and having this, and life's all about having better but not making the world better, then we become unproductive. Life has become all about us. Matter of fact, our whole Because initiative, we said, listen, of course I want a building. Who doesn't want a building? I hate having to cancel services when there's no air conditioning. We have to set this. I would love to have a building, but we had 50,000 people in another community 20 minutes away for a tenth of the price that we could impact. Of course we want what's best for us, but it was better for them. And it's where we got our scripture. We're going to put it up on the screen. 2 Corinthians 5, it says, for Christ what? See, let's see, this is really awesome. Remember those hardened areas? Something happens when the love of grace of God comes into your heart. That hardened area becomes soft and you begin to care about others. It says, for Christ's love compels us because we are convinced that one died for all and therefore all have died. Just quick note, if you're here and you're thinking about maybe you want to follow Jesus, just so you know, when you follow Jesus, you're saying yes to him and no to yourself. That was free. Next. And he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for. When you're a follower of Jesus, life isn't like, there's a part of life that's about us. We should go to work, we should do our things, we should be responsible. But they no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. And then it goes on to say in verse 18, it says, all this is God who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of what? Man, wouldn't it be awesome if the church really took a hold of that in the racial issue here in our country? Gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That human beings would be reconciled to each other. If we want our lives to not be unproductive, if we want our lives when we talk about our dash, when we dream about what people are going to say when we get to that dash, you don't want them to say, oh, they had a nice car, they had a nice house, they had nice clothes. Is that what you want them to say? Or do you want them to say, hey, he or she, they made a difference. They were a great neighbor. I remember when this happened, they showed up. Oh man, him or her, man, our community was better. If they ever moved, it would be sad. Like the way we're not underproductive is we realize that we have a purpose. And it changes our expectation from that we get green lights and the clothes that we want in the mall are there to I've been given this life to make a difference. To use my time and talent and treasure for something other than just myself. Which leads me to the solution of all three of these we're going to put up on the screen. Creating good soil is a process. You know how many years? And I'm still in process. People that work with me go, you're a knucklehead. And I go, yeah, I'm still in. What's that word? I'm still in process. Here's what I don't care. I don't care where you are in the process, but I do care, are you in process? Because regardless of whether you have no faith, some faith, or different faith, the real thing is, are you in process? Because if you're not in process, the only person you're hurting is you. And see, here's the great thing. Regardless of the kind of soil we have, whether it's a hardened or whether it's shallow or whether it's thorny, it can be changed to good soil. We can create good soil, but it's a process that starts in being with relationship with God and people. Man, get in a small group. Get in a Celebrate Recovery group. Find a Stevens minister. Go to professional counseling. Have someone be a part of your life. Join a team. Go coach. Go be a part of the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. Do something. All those things that we talked about involve people. It's a process that starts with a relationship with God first. Because if we relate to God this way correctly, we'll be able to relate to people this way. And by the way, here's the truth. You can't relate right this way and be wrong this way. Just saying. The timer tells me that I'm done, whether I'm finished or not. So I want to close with a true story. My youngest daughter just recently got her driver's license, and my youngest daughter, she's a good driver. You don't have to be. She is natural talent. She has more talent in her hand than I have in my whole body. She's a naturally gifted driver. We practice a lot, but for her first driving test, they had to do like this 4-point turn. And what's amazing is that she failed it. And I was really shocked. But I realized when I saw her taking the test why she failed it. We had been practicing this 4-point turn at this one location, but at the driving test, it was very different. Matter of fact, at this driving test, you didn't just pull forward and back in. They had like a 6-foot concrete like barrier that kind of separated where you were going to park and gave you like you had to start 6 feet out. And not only was there this 6-foot barrier, there was a guardrail on the other side, so it was a very narrow lane so that when you were turning, there wasn't a lot of room to get it right. You had to get it right or you had to pull all the way back. She had never practiced it that way. Now, she wanted to and she tried to pass the test, but it's like us. We're doing things hoping to get results. But we didn't get it. She wanted to and she tried to. Now, there's a couple of options that she could have done. She could have just given up and said, well, I'll just drive without a license or I'll just give up. She could have just said, Dad, just bring me back. And I'm not going to practice. I'm going to try the same way, which probably would have led to the same results. But she chose something different. We took her out and we practiced like it was at that place. We said, no, you got to be 6 feet out. Hey, you can't turn here. There's going to be a guardrail. And so she practiced just like on the test. And she went and took the test and because she did by training what she couldn't do by trying. So here's a question that I want to leave us with as we close out this series. I'm going to put up this circle that has relationally, emotionally, intellectually, physically, financially, spiritually. Have you wanted to and tried to but aren't getting the results you want? I want to ask the question, what option are you going to go with? Are you going to give up? Are you going to try harder with something that doesn't work? Or will we listen to the words of Jesus and be reminded that sometimes the obstacle is the soil of our heart that is either hardened or shallow or unproductive? And that there are things we can do to create good soil. Because here's what I want you to know. Anyone that would die for you is for you. There's no one in this universe who wants you to experience life in all those areas more than God. He's the one who sent his son so that you and I could experience life and life to the full. Let me pray. God, I know I've blown it in all these areas of my life. I know that through the different seasons of my life, I've had different kinds of soil. I know there's been times my heart's been hard. I know there's times that my heart's been shallow. God, I know there's times that my heart's been unproductive. But God, wherever I have been those things, your grace has been greater. Thank you for your grace and your love and your mercy. Thank you that you sent Jesus to pay for what I couldn't. But God, you didn't die just to get us to heaven. You want us to experience life in the here and now. God, help us to apply what you said and taught us about the parable of the seed. Because life is like a tough mudder. We want a good life, but it will have obstacles. But the great news is you have overcome, so we can overcome. This is our hope and our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.
If you're ready to take the next step in your spiritual journey or continue to support SouthPoint, you can connect to a small group, serve on a team, and give financially by clicking the box on the right. To watch other sermons from SouthPoint Church, click the playlist on the left. Click the logo to subscribe.